So the first of our in-person fireside chats. We're happy to have Dr. Angelique Johnson with us. And I have sort of been a fan from afar, seeing some of the work that Angelique and her team has been doing. I think the first time maybe I saw your company was through some of the exposure with MedTech Color, and then a little bit through MDG as well. And so, one of the sessions that we have are thinking about, being a CEO, running a company, running an organization, and the speakers that we have are all looking at from sort of three different points of view. So, like, what is it like running the company? What is it, as a, coming from a technical role up through? Sandeep's going to talk about that. And then we'll get Ibrahim's comments about what it's like as a CEO working with a strategic and what has to come into play from there. So we'll cover some of that in our discussions. Feel free to ask questions as we go or at the end. There's a wealth of knowledge in the room at the moment, so let's take advantage of that. I think first, just to get started, I think it'd be helpful for people to hear kind of your background and kind of what you do today.
Cool, awesome. So I got started with my company MEMStim, which I'll just cut to the chase. We basically make medical implants to treat things like hearing loss, chronic pain, and heart failure. At least that's our intent. So like most of you, we have to go through regulatory process. For that, I'll explain later how that works for us. But I started MEMStim when I was finishing up my PhD at the University of Michigan. I had no intention of starting a company. It was really just an exercise in learning about entrepreneurship. So I'd have something to talk about in my interviews for companies where I would have to be starting them because all my colleagues were saying like, oh yeah, this is around the height of the whole entrepreneurial craze, back in, the ancient days. And so, I ended up getting high on my own supply, I say, because I did a lot of pitch competitions, I did a lot of incubators, and I said, hey, maybe this is something good, but still wasn't sure if I wanted to take on the responsibility of starting a company. Investors were offering me money, but, I said, I don't want to take your money. I don't know what this wasn't something I had a plan for life to do. In 2014, about 2015, I really was like, okay, this is something that I want to do, mostly because people kept reaching out and asking about it. And I realized that what I was doing at the university, I thought maybe, I'll just do the university avenue, the same thing. And I was getting nowhere. And I realized that the technology would never get in the world unless I did a company. That was the only way to make it happen. And so since then, I've done mostly non-dilutive funding through the NIH, state funding, things like that, about $5 million. And, and that kind of takes us to where we are today. I'll maybe give a little bit of thought. So where we are today is we're basically nearing the end of our R&D cycle. So basically, we came out of the university with one technology, and we thought, well, we have prototypes and animal studies, and this is great. And then we went to talk to potential customers, did a little customer discovery, and they were like, yeah, no. Not because scientifically it wouldn't work, but because of their risk. You guys were doing the SWOT earlier, right? So because of their own culture and their own, standards, the way they operate, they said, we really need it to be in these set of materials, we need this and that. Even if you prove to us the other is the same, it's not going to work. And so we redid the technology entirely, created new IP. We still, have access to the old IP. And that process is what we're coming to the end of now. And really at the point now where we need to scale to a pilot plant. We have a sub-pilot plant now on facilities where we can produce, but we really need to scale to a pilot plant so that we can begin to really take on serious contracts.
Yeah, great, thank you. So you went pretty quickly from school to CEO, essentially. We have a couple folks that are internal technologies that are, you're kind of thinking about doing that too, right? You're kind of finishing PhD and starting a company. Do you recommend that people do that? Is it, or is it something that, have a watch out? Or sort of, advice maybe as you're stepping through that?
If I could go back in time, thankfully God doesn't allow us to steer our own lives, so I can't go back in time. So if I went back in time, I'd do something that would totally ruin what I'm doing now. Yeah, right. But if I have my own logic and I went back in time, maybe working for another company, perhaps one that I wanted to sell to in the future, and strategically kind of almost like a mole and planting myself in that company, learning how because we're doing, I told you guys we're making these implants. I kind of gave you the short version. We're basically making an automated manufacturing process for a major component of these implants. So if I could go back in time, I probably would have worked for like a Medtronic or Boston Scientific, learned everything that they're doing on the inside. And that would have helped me in developing my own company, because what you don't get, and going straight from internal to CEO, is you don't get to learn the workings of the industrial side, like that element. And so I think there's some companies here that are already inside. So you have a huge advantage in that you already know all of this. Some things are pain points, some things just how do you, so we've had to learn that part of it, and by asking. And plus when you haven't formed a company, people tell you anything. And then as soon as you form it, then you are like, well, that's proprietary information. But when I was a student, they tell me anything I wanted to know.
Oh, interesting.
So it's, I
always
probably
be a
would have,
student.
always be a student. I probably would have gone back and done that. But that being said, a lot of people come out same way I did, and that's how most people come out. So.
Yeah. And so how did you form those networks or figure it out? How did you learn to get those different pieces that you didn't have the exposure to? We
had some industry collaborations even when I was a PhD student. And that was my first point, because we're collaborating. We were already, before I even started thinking about forming a company, sending them technology and devices, and they were trying to figure out how they could integrate it into their company. So that helped, because they were the first, like, okay, and we were working the cochlear implant originally. So we were collaborating with the largest producer of cochlear implants. So I could talk to the CTO anytime I wanted to. I could talk to the president anytime I wanted to. They're based out of Australia. And so that was my first connection. But then I went to the IIsa program, and where they focus a lot on customer discovery. And that forced, us to really go beyond just the cochlear implant market, which is what all the PhD focus was on, and start trying to make connections to other companies. And for that, it was literally just warm introductions. So whether it was my advisor, hey, I know you know so-and-so that used to be a student that works at Medtronic, or every connection leads to a connection. So every time I met with somebody, let's say at St. Jude Medical, which is now part of Abbott, I said, hey, is there someone else you think I should talk to, either inside or outside of the company? And then you just do that, and you get a trail of connecting. And the nice thing about the medical device sector is it's concentrated. It's also the bad thing. But you know where your customers are at. There's only a handful of them, and you just have to make inroads in each one. And it's most important that they know who you are too. So sometimes I get contacted by high ups in companies I've never really connected to, never found a meaningful connection, but they're like, oh yeah, we know about you, and so-and-so said to call you about this or that, and we just want to know where you're at. So when you talk to a lot of people, then people know about you, even if you don't know about them. So
yeah, right. That it's that network effect where someone says, oh, someone told me they met you. And you're like, oh, how did they know me? I might not know exactly the person that you are looking for, but I know Angelique, and she knows the person you're looking for. So try to make those networks within this classroom as well. So, and is there a time in your schooling or so I guess at some point before you started your company that you knew that you wanted to work in the medical field and medical devices?
Since I was young, I was fascinated with the medical field, the human body, but I didn't want to be a doctor. I never wanted to be a doctor, but I always wanted to be an engineer or something like that. And I was obsessed maybe with the concept of, even in college, I wanted to combine circuits in the body. But at that time, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know there was a feel for that. And so the further I went along, doing different internships, the more I realized, oh, there's a name for this. It's either neuromorphic engineering, if it's just about circuits and no body, but they're just mimicking the body, or it's microelectrode arrays or neural stimulators. So, but I always had an interest in combining medicine, but I never had an interest in becoming a doctor. I never wanted to do anything on that side.
Yeah, great. So I know that since I've seen you speaking and seen your background, et cetera, that you do provide a lot of advice to startup companies. Are there like a couple of questions that you frequently get from startups or smaller organizations, or like common threads through some of those conversations that would be interesting to share?
One, just on the basic side, a lot of people want to know, when do I quit my day job
Right.
and start this thing full time? And I am somewhat risk averse, so different people will give you a different answer. But I think if anyone's asking me that question, they're probably more like me. They wouldn't be asking me that question if they were like, I'm just going to get out there and do it. They would have done it already. So I always say, when you can look at least a year ahead and you feel like, I know where my salary is going to come for a year out. And maybe after that year, who knows, right? But a year gives you enough time. Let's say you quit your day job to and I mean salary, typically salary should be coming from your business. So maybe if you're a startup, you're like, okay, I raised enough money that now I know I can at least pay myself a living wage. Okay, it's not, I'm making a whole lot of money perhaps, but I can pay myself to sustain myself for a year. Okay, then that gives you a year. And God willing, you'll get more funding, or if you're want people to come out automatically revenue generating, which I don't think any of you guys would be, because of you all have to go through the FDA. But even if you were that case as an entrepreneur, whatever it is, just being able to pay your salary and see that a year out just gives you more comfort. Let's say you fail the business. Okay, but then you have a year of experience in doing this business, and that's always marketable. I mean, even though I started just to get that experience and then I ended up forming a business, that's still a very valuable. You could roll back into a company and you will have added value in that year to you being in them, because everybody's big on entrepreneurship now, as you guys know, right? Many of you are entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, are there other sort of fears that you hear from startups or concerns from the corporate side of it as well?
I think people tend to also be very fearful about sharing their idea, but since you guys are here in the room, I assume that you don't have that fear.
We know a lot.
Right? So, or who do I share it with? Let's say I want a strategic corporate contact, like, Ibrahim was going to come and talk about that. When do I tell that connection about what I'm doing? What do I say? What I don't say? One piece of advice I always tell people is they're going to try and if they want it, they'll try and reverse engineer it. Okay, that's the assumption. So the only question, waste a lot of time thinking, well, I don't want to tell them because they're going to revert. They're going to do it. I mean, if you were that company, you would do it, right? So the only question is, do you have enough confidence that you have something unique in your company that you could do it quicker than they could reverse engineer it to make it worth their while to just pay for it? Because you all work in corporations or different entities know that at the end of the day, if I can pay you and to save us a lot of time and money, I'll probably come back and try to pay you. I might try it for a little bit, but then I'll just come back and be like, okay, we couldn't figure it. And I hear that a lot. Like, I met with the company and they tried to reverse engineer it, and then they just came back and they were like, so can we just buy you for this, or can you just do it? But if you're making something that's so easily reverse engineered, then you should question, do you even have a competitive advantage in the market? Especially in this sector.
Yeah, because your IP should protect you at some level.
Yeah.
But still, if it's a simple device, then they might find another workaround or some other way
to do it. Yeah.
And that's that value proposition we talked about. Creating your value proposition, understanding who the users are, and also the business and economic kind of story behind the value proposition. And I think the other bit, I told these guys earlier that I had some time where I supported the business development team when I was at J&J. And one of the things, at least from J&J's perspective, was risk reduction. And so, do you see that as well? Like from the strategic point of view, where
shareholders,
you pay for lower risk, essentially? Yeah,
sure. Shareholders don't like paying for R&D. So, so what's trending now, right, and it's been trending for a while, is it's so much easier to buy a startup that's been de-risked versus trying to ask for an R&D budget internally to start something from scratch that's highly risky, or to have, an entrepreneurship team. Now doesn't mean they don't do it, right? But once you work that out, even some of you guys, sounds like some of you are working as those entrepreneurship teams, right? But at some point, I've even seen some companies have an entrepreneur and spin it out because it's a way, for lack of a better term, to, I can get funding for investment, maybe I've already expended my R&D goodwill with the company. So I'll spin you out and I'll invest in you as an external. We'll run the money that way, and then we'll bring you back in perhaps if you work out. So it's just different ways that key stakeholders that you're talking to, where their budget lies and what they're incentivized or de-incentivized to do.
Yeah. And I think that's where we were, even with the weaknesses and the threats that we were going through is, as you guys are thinking about your strategies that come from that, is that's the de-risking, right? Is how you can get rid of some of those issues that pop up that could be, a question for an investor or for a strategic. So that's good. Any questions at that point so far? Yeah.
You said you're getting closer to sell products or to reach your goals in terms of the device you want to make. And you've been in this for multiple years now. Yeah. How do you pitch to investors who are expecting revenue from the companies when you have a super long development cycle?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The question is, when do you go for investment? So our strategy has been, we knew we had a long runway, like a long road to go. So we said, let's go for non-dilutive funding to de-risk the technology and to pay for things that we knew investors weren't going to really go for. Now, that being said, when I started the company, I was pitching it, there was a lot of investors that wanted to invest. So sometimes it's the way you structure things, and it's whether or not you're in, environment. I guess you guys probably went over that, right? The environmental factors. So there's no hard yes or no. In other words, you might have a long runway and investors might still invest, especially if they're strategic. GlaxoSmithKline is heavily investing in what they call neurostimulators, electroceuticals, and they have pumped a lot of money into companies that are even earlier stage than we are, right? So part of it's connections, and it's what that company sees or what that investor sees and what their runway and their money is. But that being said, if you end up wanting to being in a zone where you need to pitch to an investor that wants to see revenue, in that case, then you really have to be very strategic about your strategic's not from an investment perspective, but from can I get some advanced contracts? Because if they want revenue, that means that you must be in a field where revenue is possible early on. If you're not, they don't expect revenue because they don't.
I guess my question is more like a lot of investors don't understand why it takes so long to get those devices to market. How do you go through this barrier, through this explanation?
Part of it is you can't, this is I take everything I said with a grain of salt.
Right.
But part of it is you can't convince somebody to invest in a company that they have no track record investing in. So the right investor, you don't have to explain to them the revenue. Now the wrong investor who's never invested in a company like yours before in that sector, they're like, oh, generate revenue. Maybe they've been investing in shoes, or maybe they've been investing in wearables, but you're saying, oh no, this is it's not the same thing. It might be hard to convert that company over. So there's fewer investors in the space that you all are operating in, but you have to find those investors because they don't have to convince them anything because they know already.
In the space, yeah.
You can't sell it right off the top. So it's making sure, and one tip is when you look at investors and you're trying to cold call around, just look at their portfolio. What companies have they invested in, and see if their timeline to revenue matches your timeline to revenue. And then that gives you a good indicator about, are they in the similar sectors? It lets you know if they haven't invested in the past, they're not likely to invest in something new because they all have their zones. I'm not saying don't talk to them, but I am saying that you've got to find the investor that understands you, whether it's an angel investor, venture capital firm, or strategic, that gets it, and then you won't have to explain a whole lot to them because they already know.
So there's those investment groups that have sort of like investment thesis, like this is the area we invest in, or the areas of growth that we see. Like Kwame yesterday said, he's like, we're looking for data. Like if you have data, like I'm interested, right? And I know it's the same with strategic investors as well, right? So we're looking to grow in this certain sector of this market because that's a gap that we have in what we are offering to the marketplace now, or that only internal expertise isn't there. If they can inorganically grow through that acquisition, so I think that all ties together. And I didn't say before, you should say your name and the group that you work for. He actually has a very relevant technology that you guys can speak more, but Yeah.
So, for the plug, my graduation is in 2 weeks. Started my company last summer.
Yeah.
We make micro electrode arrays.
Oh, nice.
And the innovations that they are made of totally new elastomer.
Yeah.
And I couldn't go for non-dilutive funding because I'm not US citizen. So I had to do venture capital first. And now I'm going to be able to.
But now he's going to get green cards.
Oh, okay, cool. There you go.
So great. So Karen?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Paul's question. So I'm Corinne Williams. I'm from Draper. We're developing a pediatric heart valve for infants and children that will grow with them. And so you're talking about funding, and I hear that the more you can do non-dilutive funding, the better. So I'm just curious as to what strategies you use to find it and secure it.
Yeah.
SBIRs tend to be the biggest seed fund here in the U.S., of course. And having a good relationship with a program manager, forging a good relationship, primarily, they don't make the decisions. You submit an SBI, Small Business Innovation Research grant, and it's reviewed by a panel of your peers. You may never heard of them before, but they're your peers. And the program manager has very little say in ultimately whether you get approved. But what the program manager can do is they can prevent you from submitting something or help you in terms of, well, we don't really fund that, or we do fund that, or, you might want to rethink that, and steer it in this zone or that zone. They can't have conflicts of interest, obviously, and they're never going to tell you how to write your application or just what to apply for. But they will hopefully steer you, and so that helps. I had a really good relationship with the program manager in the area that ended up getting a lot of my funding in, which came through a network, right? He had a good relationship with my thesis advisor. So when I got connected to him, it wasn't like he didn't have any concept of what we were doing. They'd already been kind of pseudo funding it on the research level. So it made sense on that side. DOD, COE, DOE, Department of Energy or Department of Defense. So they're very relationship-based, extremely relationship-based. I don't know. I mean, the thought is you get to relationship first, and then you go apply, and then a solicitation is made maybe for you, and that type of a thing. So it's a lot of it's relationship, but maybe you don't have any relationship with any program. You can always call the program manager. There's certain areas at NIH I don't have any relationship, so you have to start somewhere. So I reach out to the program manager. Send them your summary statement. Some of them now are doing pre-pitches. NSF, I think you do a pitch deck, which that's what you're doing here will be helpful for that. And you send them your pitch deck, and that's a first review. And if they like your pitch deck, then they give you permission to submit. And that helps because you get feedback early on, so you don't waste your time submitting an application that could fail.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's two other options that I know. Actually, Kwame mentioned earlier, and I forgot to tell you guys more about it, but there's the Taba Program, TABA. I don't know if you've been involved with that at all or not, but essentially it's money for the business side of developing your startup. So doing market research, doing reimbursement, doing regulatory scans, those kinds of things. And they have some limits. I think it's up to a $50,000 grant, but you can do a lot of money with $50,000. The other is there are organizations that are they're consultants, so they get paid for doing this, but they help you find the grant programs that are appropriate for your technology. And there's one that I know of in the area here. If you're interested in that, I can give you some information about them. And they help you write the grant. This organization works in a contingency. So if you get the grant, they get paid a percentage of it or something like that. So there's pros and cons to that, but and I'm sure there's other organizations that do that as well.
The state funds, they call them matching funds programs. There's not a whole lot left. There was a handful of states that did it. So pretty much if you got an SBIR grant or even investment dollars, the state, if you would to incentivize you to move to that state or to stay in that state, they would match up to a certain amount those investment funds or the non-dilutive funding that you got. So we're in Kentucky because Kentucky was one of those states. So we basically got to more or less double our money on a phase one. On a phase 2, it used to be you could get up to $1 million match in 2 phases, 500, 500. Okay, but then the state begins winnowing away. Most states have, it's hard to keep that programming going.
Yeah.
Now they're down low, and then, we hope maybe they'll go back up. But so look for states, it's called like SBIR matching funds, and look for states.
In our state's 50,000.
50, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Are you in North
South
Carolina?
Carolina.
South Carolina. Okay, I was gonna say, I was like, is North Carolina or South Carolina that, yeah, a lot of them have gone down and down. I think Kentucky might be the only state that's offering the most still, but even they've gone down a lot.
Yeah, I imagine with COVID, everyone's kind of reflected on the funding sources and what they do with their funds for that too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, great. I know another thing that we wanted to cover, we talked briefly about before, was about identifying people to join your team. In our, you heard some of the weaknesses that we heard, from some of the team members earlier, that we don't have all the people that we need. So, what are the key things you're looking for? How do you think about adding members to your team?
So we are in one of the most challenging. Kentucky's great because it matches your funds, but
Not
it's
as many people, I
still
guess.
Kentucky. Okay, I'm not from Kentucky, so I can say that maybe. But at the end of the day, they have a brain drain. That's a politically correct way to put it. So they have universities producing talent, but the talent is trying to, get the he-hat call out of Kentucky. So now the nice thing is people kind of get addicted. Kentucky's unique. So I'm in Louisville. It's a pretty progressive city in Kentucky. People are born and raised there. So they leave, and then more or less they come back to it. So some of our early hires were people that had left, which was great because they had experience beyond, and it's not just beyond, if you're in mass, it's the same thing. You want somebody that has experience beyond one thing, because then it's hard to put them in a startup because they become very rigid and fixed. And startups are all about being nimble, being open to changing ideas and things like that. So I don't care if they spent their whole life in Pennsylvania, you would want somebody that has had a series of experiences. So our first hires were people that had left, come back. Typically they were PhDs. It's nice if you can get one that's worked at another startup. So we had our first CTO, was really great. We brought her in and she had that, just enough experience. But that's hard, few and far between. And so we've had to be creative. So when you're building out your team, the things that you want people that are comfortable with change, comfortable in a fast-paced environment and can thrive in that. You want people that, if you can get it, that are loyal to what you're trying to do. Loyal enough. Just be honest, if you're dealing with anybody past the millennial generation, they're not sticking around anywhere for more than 2 years, maybe 3 years. Okay, so loyal means, when I hire you in, can I at least expect to get 2 years out of you? And as a startup, that's a pretty good amount of time, right? So what you don't want is somebody that when you interview them, they're very adverse to change. They want to kind of be comfortable and they want to work by themselves, because as a startup, you have a small team. It's all hands on deck. So some of our biggest challenges have been hiring individuals that maybe, really in the interview we thought, but then when they get in, it's like, oh, this person's really an extreme introvert and they're really brilliant, but they not maybe the best people. Yeah, they don't talk. They're not the best people person. They don't want people touching their zone. Well, we're all stuck and smushed in a small space, so we don't have, but there's no luxury of your own zone. And so, but being creative. So we have to be creative. We actually will hire interns, co-ops more so. So we'll hire university students. Some cases we've done even non-traditional student paths, and we'll hire them for 3 or 4 months. And some of those have actually converted over to being full-time hires for us. It's a good way as a startup to see what you're looking at before you invest time and energy and you got a limited budget. And it's also a good way to get to breed loyalty, because if they like the experience, it's your opportunity to show them, why don't go to Medtronic, come work for me. That's a hard selling point as a startup. But if I can show you in 4 months that you're valued here, it's interesting work, there's an upside to it, then that makes it so much better.
Yeah, definitely. And then are there certain skills that you think are critical to have internal versus what you might hire out or have advisors or consultants?
Innovation, internal for sure. Made the mistake early on of hiring some people that were great, let's say test engineers, but not very innovative in their thinking. And so your core internal team, you want everybody as much as possible to be innovative. Until you get to size, you're like, I can afford to have you just pushing a knob somewhere. And then I outsource anything that doesn't really require creativity per se. It's more of just getting it done. So I need a micro injection mold. Okay, let me outsource that to a manufacturing firm. We need a new plate system for our printer. Could we know where you're getting your stuff? And technically, could we do it in-house? Yes, but A, it doesn't require a whole lot of innovation on our side. And B, it could be cheaper to go with you because then I have to take my limited team and put them on something, and that could just be a lot.
It's the startup time of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the flip side, don't outsource your innovation because we have made the mistake where we thought something was, the company convinced us like, oh yeah, we did this in our sleep. And then we ended up we're like, dang, we could have thought of a better solution than you. And I paid $50,000 for this part. And now my team is trying to get on the phone with you and explain to your team, that how this should work. So
you have to be careful
you have
about
to
who
be
you're
careful
working with.
about, who you're working, and then really think about, show me that this is, give me some examples, hard, concrete examples, because you can end up having to do that.
Yeah. Any questions up to that point? No? That makes sense. Yeah, great. So maybe what we can do is we can switch to the Visionarium a little bit. It's possible they haven't heard of the organization, so maybe tell them a little about that and kind of some of the work you're doing there.
So with MEMStim, we early on wrote a mission for our company, and we knew that we were in medical devices. We want to have a human impact. And really, as a CEO, you have to motivate your team, even when your medical device is a long timeline, to seeing real fruit. So we said, okay, well, we can't put implants on people today, but we can still have human impact. So we decided, well, MEMStim should have some sort of outreach effort. And at the time, we were in Louisville, Kentucky. We saw that there was this huge lack of knowledge and resources being put towards female entrepreneurs of color. So MEMStim started doing incubator programs and outreaching and partnering with other organizations. And really, it became a lot of effort. And so we said, well, we need to actually spin out another company. That was Visionarium. And so we say it's for vision-rich entrepreneurs and leaders. We're really kind of helping people that have a vision, they want to execute on it, but they don't have the knowledge, the skill set, the resources to do that. And so with Visionarium, so let's form another company with its own staff, with its own, so that we don't have that detractor from MEMStim. And that's been great because we get to, still make impact, make reach, and connect. Now we don't just do only female entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of color. We've expanded to everybody, but we're still very passionate about serving the underserved and providing resources to the underserved. And actually unearthing, that's MedTech Color. That's kind of one of my motivators for launching into MedTech Color, which I guess we'll talk about in a moment, is that there's a lot of technology, a lot of great companies, a lot of great service providers that we want that don't have the resources to be in a position to help us. And so we see as an ecosystem, we want to develop these companies because they're needed across the board. And really it was like, hey, I need to develop some people that we can feed into us, give it back to us, kind of building your own friends.
You're building your pipeline of people too, right?
Yeah, building our pipeline of people.
Yeah, great. And, we were chatting a little earlier too about, you can maybe also talk a little bit about MedTech Color, but thinking about, there are so many organizations that CEOs or entrepreneurs can get involved with. Like, how do you choose? Like, what are the good reasons to get involved with an organization and what you might get out of it? Maybe we kind of cover both of those.
Getting involved in an organization, well, purely just from a selfish motivation. Any organization, you can connect or network with individuals, maybe strategic partners that you want, corporate partners, maybe investors, service providers, vendors, anything where you can partner, or get to know individuals. I think that's orgs to be into. The other side of it is, putting yourself out there in terms of if somebody sales opportunities, right? So if I'm involved in this org and I'm active in this org, is there an opportunity for me to market my services, market my startup, market my company? And so you want to look for organizations where you have those opportunities. Maybe they have conferences or they have meetings or so that there's marketing opportunities for your company, particularly as a startup, ones that are more affordable than, spending, 10 grand to travel every 2 or 3 months. And then the other is, I think you should be involved in some smaller groups. Maybe they're not official orgs, but MedTech Color, we're a relatively young organization, I guess I'll tell. So MedTech Color is an organization that Kwame Omer, I call him the founder in chief. He basically reached out and brought together a group of individuals that were interested in advancing people of color in the medical technology field. So increasing the number of CEOs, upper level management, and then on the clinical side, increasing participation in clinical trials for people of color, things like that. So he reached out, and at first I was super busy when he reached out, and I was thinking, and Kwame probably tell you, I was like, I don't want to do this.
No way,
everybody wants me to serve on something, and we're already, I got, this, and at that point I was like, okay, I have to choose what I want to do because my time is limited. But what was really attractive was that it aligned with my mission and my purpose, stuff I was already doing. So you want to make sure that there's alignment, otherwise it's just work for you. And so I was very passionate about what he was talking about. And then the other thing is, it's allowing you to build something with a group of individuals that, I don't know, maybe they'll be useful connections or not, but they're pretty good individuals to be connected to. And when you build stuff together with people, then you really form connections. Then then that person's going to talk about you in the room when you're not there. So I say always get involved in a smaller scale, and if you can, more hands-on outreach, so that you're not one of maybe 1 million people in an organization or 1,000 people or even 100 people in an organization. Maybe you want to serve on the board level for some of those, or on the early founding team, because then you can form really good connections. And looking at who's on that board with you is helpful.
So maybe similarly, I hear from some companies that come to MDG meetings, for example, like, oh, I just don't want the vendors always just pitching to me all the time. How do you navigate that? And is it, you don't always want to say no, I think, because they still could be a good connection, but I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
Some organizations we're not as active on because it is just a lot of kind of people, we're all pitching to each other type thing, which is why I always fall back. Does it align with a passion area or a strategic area for, either myself, because you are an individual when you join these organizations. Some organizations you join as a company. Right. So does it align with the company in some way? Does it align with their passions, their mission? Does it align with you? And but that doesn't mean you can't get in and get out what you want. So you can always ignore the vendor requests if there's still something that you're getting out of it. So I recently participated in a conference and not really in my area. And there was a lot of that, people reaching out already, but we also made some really solid connections. It was a smaller conference, single session. And we actually had some really good opportunities that came out for our company. So you're just filtering through that. And I don't know, it's not entirely bad to have people because maybe someone reaches out to you and you weren't thinking about it, but a year goes by and you're like, oh yeah, remember there was a company that said that they make medical wires at the time, and was like, why are you bothering me? And now it's like, oh yeah.
I need some medical wires.
Wires.
Right, yeah, great. Any other questions from you guys? Yeah, please.
So as far as your spinoff company, was that a nonprofit?
So we did not go the nonprofit route. And the reason I didn't go the nonprofit route was because I had a really good friend. She was a lawyer, and her and I used to have these philosophical conversations, and I learned a lot from her. And she explained to me in layman's terms, she said, why would you ever build a nonprofit when you could build a for-profit And since she worked with corporations, she was like, they have two funding routes. They can invest through the foundation or they can invest through marketing budget. And there's a tax write-off all the same because she's an accountant too.
Sure.
So, so she was like, if you want to form a nonprofit because you want to do good, you're thinking, I want to raise funds. I need to give people a tax deduction. She's like, it doesn't matter to the company. They'll one arm or the other. It's still, goodwill is goodwill. But the other reason we didn't do a nonprofit is because we wanted to, MEMStim was a for-profit, and I just had that entrepreneurial mindset of wanted to force, even in the outreach endeavors, is there a profitable business model in this? And by not becoming a nonprofit, then we're forcing ourselves to sustain ourselves through revenue, right? At the very least, sustaining. And then also, we don't have, that's kind of a side thing. So we don't have a whole lot of energy to put towards that, right? But there's always a potential of, could this in itself become a startup in some way through a technology play or something like that? And so there's a few things that come up with that. And when you make a nonprofit, you cannot reverse that decision. You can always spin out a nonprofit arm of Visionarium called Visionarium Nonprofit. Right. But you can't take a nonprofit and suddenly be like, no, we're for-profit, Visionarium for-profit.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. I think we're officially out of time, but you'll be here for the judging and later at the networking event. So feel free to ask questions as we go through. So thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank
Appreciate
you.
your time today.
Thank you.